On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
As you've heard me say many times, we have more liquid gold under our feet than any nation on earth, and by far. And now I fully authorize the most talented team ever assembled to go and get it. It's called Drill, Baby, Drill.
That's a bit from U.S. President Donald Trump's first live address to Congress earlier this week, when he outlined his administration's progress after being sworn in as president. And while some Canadians may have been listening for words about the current tariffs and the scary trade war, longtime Montreal environmentalist Stephen Bronfman was also likely listening for anything in that speech about saving the planet. Unfortunately, what he heard was anything but. Instead, Trump boasts about how he's ordered the U.S. to pull out of the International Paris Accords, an agreement they signed that requires countries to lower their pollution levels to keep the Earth from heating up, which experts warn is already causing widespread weather damage and making it even more dangerous for people, plants, and animals to survive. Trump's also lifted the rules on drilling for oil and gas. He's slashed funding for green energy projects. He's focusing on building cars and chopping the bureaucrats in the Environmental Protection Agency. Bronfman's walked the walk and talked the talk on the environment for years, which is why he's decided to do something new to secure the Earth's future, despite what Trump is doing and despite what Canadian political leaders also seem to want to copy, like chopping the carbon tax and building more pipelines. This month, Bronfman is officially launching the Jewish Climate Trust. It's based in Palm Beach, Florida. He's convinced other Jewish donors in Canada and the U.S. to pony up, and so far they've raised an initial $18 million to get things going. Jewish donors, Bronfman says, who normally wouldn't think of putting their charity into the environment, but now, after October 7th, might not be so comfortable giving their money to green groups who oppose Israel, and instead want it to be handled by folks who understand that saving the environment is steeped in the values of Tikkun Olam and the Torah.
I think this is, it's a Jewish response to climate. And so I think that's what's giving people somewhere to go that they can trust in a time that maybe a lot of Jewish families and foundations are less trusting of other larger organizations, right? So this is a place where, this is a safe space.
I'm Ellen Besner, and this is what Jewish Canada sounds like for Thursday, March 6th, 2025. Welcome to the CJN Daily. It's a podcast of the Canadian Jewish News and made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Gronowski-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Stephen Bronfman is the son of philanthropist Charles Bronfman. Stephen now runs the family's personal investment foundations, but the environment was always important to the younger Bronfman. When he bought his grandfather's historic mansion on top of Montreal's Mount Royal, he made sure the retrofit was certifiably sustainable. And more recently, he's required any service providers for his family's Birthright Taglit organization, which brings Jewish adults for free trips to Israel, to follow environmentally friendly practices. Bronfman's new Jewish climate venture gets its official rollout on March 24th at a conference of Jewish donors in Nashville, Tennessee. His dad and Montrealer Jeff Hart from the Climate Solutions Prize are already on the board. So are some well-known American Jewish families, including the Schustermans of Tulsa, who made their fortune in a very non-environmental field, oil and gas. The group's already issued 2 big grants, There's money to help North American synagogues and schools and Jewish homes lower their carbon footprints. There's money for a green Jewish business network. And there's an interfaith program as well. $3 million more went to an Israeli environmental group because the Jewish people in the diaspora and also in Israel are both at risk from climate problems. Stephen Bronfman joins me now to break down his new idea. Welcome to the CJN Daily for your first time.
Thanks, Ellen. Nice to be here.
How did your idea come about to launch the trust?
You know, I come from a family that does kind of big stuff. And big stuff not just in business, but big stuff philanthropically. You know, Dad founded Birthright, amongst many things. His brother was president of the World Jewish Congress. And so I turned 60 last year. And
happy birthday.
You know, I was thinking about my 60th birthday, and I was thinking about, you know, taking some stuff that I've been passionate about my whole career and my whole life, and, you know, how can I step some of those things up? And you know, I've been on the board of the David Suzuki Foundation for 30 years. He's been a great mentor of mine. I've learned so much. You know, it's not a flash in the pan. It's not just because climate is a big issue, I'm going to go get involved. David likes to refer to me as the first Canadian to really put money behind climate 25 years ago. So credibility there, and then obviously the family being so involved in the Jewish world, I start to realize that a lot of these big foundations do so much in the Jewish world, but the Jewish world does so little when it comes to climate. And, you know, Tikkun Olam is, you know, I mean, these are Jewish values. And so I started to talk to people, and I started to talk on panels, having meetings and really starting to connect with people. I said, you know what, this has potential. And so we came up with a name. We started asking people if they were interested in being partners. And within sort of a year of talking to people, we had a partnership. We had a minion. We had 10 partners. We raised high $18 million over a first three-year period. And we had our first board meeting at the Jewish Museum in New York in September. So we've really incorporated, we've just started, and actually right now we're doing more of our sort of media launch and sort of opening up to say, hey world, we're here and we're doing good things.
Going back to what you said about climate didn't seem to be a Jewish thing, but it is a Jewish, from way back, how to care for the land, right in the Torah, and the 7 years of rest, and we have a responsibility. And so it's not something foreign to our people. So when you say that they're not really into climate in a big way, how did you sort of marry this disconnect?
In talking with people, what I started to realize, because, you know, really, I mean, in Canada, we have some pretty good, you know, sizable foundations and private donors, but in the U.S. is really sort of where the tachas is and the heft. And so starting to meet with some of the founders or some of the people running these foundations, I started to realize that maybe the matriarchs and patriarchs that set these up, you know, maybe climate wasn't one of their interests, but sort of next gen and people of sort of my generation that are running things like, for instance, like a Stacy Schusterman or some, you know, people like that are like very interested and don't know where to go, don't know all that much. I mean, obviously it's very topical. It's in the news all the time. It's an issue that people want to get involved with, but don't know how. So by doing something Jewishly, because I got asked a lot, well, why the Jewish Climate Trust? Why don't you just continue doing your climate work, but get a bit more international? And, you know, by growing things, you need collaboration, you need partnerships. Partnerships are difficult at the best of times, right? So let's start with values. Let's start with shared values of Jewish families sitting around the table. There's a level of trust already built in. There's a connection already built in. And let's see what we can do. And let's involve Israel and sort of the diaspora and see what kind of programming we can do in both places and use our connections and our business know-how, you know, political activities and whatnot, and sort of see how we can have a bit of influence in this climate world.
I understand one of your co-founders mentioned that because of the situation now with Israel and Hamas and Israel being sort of isolated, some progressive environmental
groups and charities, and even the Suzuki Foundation, to be fair, have people who go to protests for anti-Israel protests, pro-Palestinian protests. Have you found that to be what you're hearing?
Sure, it's uncomfortable. It's kind of like the freedom marches. It's kind of like the peace movements in the 60s. And, it's an issue that people are grabbing onto. A lot of people like to support what they would think of as the Palestinian cause, as the underdog going up against big, strong Israel and America. So, it's important that we stand strong. And then, if you look at what's come out of October 7th, and especially around the Gaza envelope, around the north, around the whole notion of rebuilding in Lebanon, rebuilding in Syria, there's a huge amount of money and technological and sustainable thought that needs to go into that as well. So, we're using that and Israel as sort of a living lab for not only pushing the notion of sustainability in these rebuilds, but also taking Israeli technology and know-how and using it as a bridge politically in the region of having our Abraham partners working together on climate issues. Because everything, how many degrees of separation, right? Everything is linked. And so Israel working on issues like that can be very helpful to Saudi, to UAE, to, all these different nations, even, Jordan, Egypt, all our neighbors can benefit from the Israeli sechel, right?
Would they be accepting of it because, as I said earlier, because of Israel being isolated? And so it's kind of fraught a little bit to take Israeli farmer technology and, teach them how to do this better.
What we're doing with the Jewish Climate Trust is we're giving people in the field and people that are getting involved sort of this notion of hope, this notion of looking forward to tomorrow, and tomorrow is going to be better than today. And how can we make tomorrow better than today? Because today has been tough and yesterday has been really tough. So let's get out of this sort of dark area. Let's look at the light and let's use light to illuminate hope for a better world, right?
Where would President Donald Trump, the U.S. President Donald Trump's plan to rebuild and fix Gaza, if at all, play into this network that you're hoping to use with the regional players? And what do you make of his idea?
I wouldn't say that I'm a supporter, but I think that Trump and his administration have been very good for the Jewish people. And, he pushes and pushes and pushes until someone stops and pushes back. His idea about Gaza, as sort of out there as it is, what I like about it, I'll use a sports reference, is it's like a Hail Mary. It's like throwing that football as far as you can into the end zone and see who's going to jump up and catch it. And he's right about the fact that, status quo is no go. It has not worked. It doesn't work. So here's my wild way out there idea. Okay, you don't like it? What do you have that's a bit different? Come back to me with something that's going to be a bit different. So I kind of like that. I like the idea of pushing the envelope, of saying, no, we're not going to get involved in the rebuilding of Gaza. And actually with the JCT, what we're looking at is working with smaller communities in the north. It's going to be a very important collaborative effort between private foundations, between groups like ourselves, but between government. And so the whole idea of tying these things together and having proper communication and not sort of overlapping and stepping on toes and coordinating these efforts together is what's really important. And, Gaza is a huge political time bomb. And, we've all said, well, okay, it's terrible. And all the war and the bombing and the destruction, it's just horrendous. But what comes tomorrow? What's the plan? And I haven't heard anything.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, not long ago, not far away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.
How is your idea different than similar Canadian Jewish ventures, which are also now out there for the last few years? For example, your board member Jeff Hart and Jonathan Goodman's Climate Science Prize, which we've covered many times, and the Roadberg Foundation in Vancouver just invested in, I'm sure you're aware of this new venture they're doing on environmental. They're the only, I think, Jewish family foundation that's in there. But how do you position yours? Like, why not work all together, the three of you guys?
Well, Jeff is on our board. Jeff is a partner in JCT. Roadberg, we've been having discussions with, so hopefully we'll have some collaboration there. This is more of an international effort, so I don't view it as a Canadian effort. Our partners are Israeli, our partners are mainly American. Michael Sonnenfeld, my co-chair, and a group of funders from the U.S. So I look at it as, we're not yet involved very much in the EU, partners-wise, but we're Canadian, we're American, we're Israeli, and we're trying to, that's where the Jewish community really is, and let's band together and let's work together and let's try and come up with a few ideas that make sense.
Let's talk about Israel. We were surprised to learn Israel is actually a laggard in terms of legislation on climate, and I was stunned. It makes no sense. They're a startup nation. They teach everyone else how to do things.
The Israeli environmental movement has been very small always. It's interesting, too, because a lot of the local kids, they all go through the Scouts. They learn a lot. They're very involved with the nature reserve authorities. People are out hiking and they're enjoying nature. They're on the beaches and they're biking. Our foundation was involved with Sylvan Adams and the bike path that goes from border to border, from north to south across the country, which is another phenomenon. Israelis are active. They're out there, they're enjoying, they love their land, and they're so proud of their land. But when it comes to environmental work, listen, their lives are just fraught with everything that we all know, right? Life is tough. So maybe the time and space of looking at hope and thinking sort of deeper than the troubles of today, and maybe that's been a bit of a hamper to sort of growth in the environmental movement, and which has not put enough pressure on legislation, right? And that's kind of one of the things that obviously at the end of the day, if you're going to have real success, you're going to be pushing on legislation.
Well, I want to bring it back here because I know our listeners will know and our readers will know we've covered Adama, which is one of your formerly Hazon funding recipients. But maybe we can tell our listeners more that haven't read our stuff what your money will actually tachlis do for buildings, for technology here at Jewish buildings to make them more environmentally.
Yeah, I'm excited about this partnership. Adama is a great organization. Years ago, my foundation, the Claudine and Stephen Bronfman Family Foundation, did a project with Federation CJ in Montreal, and we did a greening project there. We've put down a sizable chunk of money to work on Adama, helping them, supporting them to get more projects going across North America. And I know Adama wants to do more work in Canada as well. But in this greening, and I think it's easier in a way to do the infrastructural work, sort of maybe the energy systems, maybe the windows, and rather than sometimes it's longer to change people's habits. Right, and say, okay, no more disposable, no more. And in the kosher
for kiddush and for catering,
yeah, it gets a little complicated, right? So we're looking at sort of the structural changes that can be done. Right before we started the Jewish Climate Trust, Birthright was celebrating my dad's 90th, and so my sister and I really wanted to support Birthright, but we wanted to honor Dad, and we gave a sizable piece of money, $9 million US, to this notion of greening of Birthright. We wanted to give it to Birthright, but we wanted to do it in a way that reflected our interests. And it was really not just about changing plastic water bottles to, refills and to, changing some food or whatnot. It was more about sort of affecting the supply chain in Israel, because if you look at Birthright, they're really the largest travel business in the country. even today, especially today, because nobody's going. So they can drive. They're kind of like the Walmart of travel in Israel. So everybody wants to do business with them from the supply side. So they can sort of drive change in their supply chain and say, okay, fine, you want to do business with us. You have to do things this way or that way. And so we're starting to have a lot of interest. And in fact, we've had so much success in changing some partners and how they're delivering products to us, and the knowledge base that we've created in Israel, that we're getting other organizations and even the government coming to us and saying, hey, can you help us? So again, taking that back to North America and to working with Adama, it's expertise.
Is the 18 the start? What is the actual eventual goal of raising how much?
Oh, listen, Birthright started on a shoestring, right? Started with Dad and Michael committing some money. I hope to just, it's venture philanthropy. We're going to grow this as much as we can. We're going to visit. We're going to, we just started. So I'm very hopeful. I think the timing is perfect, especially where the Trump administration is. Climate is not ranking on the top of the list right now in that administration. So again, a place where people can invest, get involved in things that many feel are being sort of pushed aside. And many of us know that it's not the time to be pushed aside, that this is an issue that is, tantamount worldwide. So people need to get involved and need to activate.
Same in this country. Our listeners will know your ties to the Liberal Party, but the carbon tax is going to probably be gone, whoever gets in, whether it's the Liberals or the Conservatives, everybody's axed the tax. So
there's a lot of pressure from one side that says, dig, baby, dig, pipeline. I think that we have to manage our resources, and they're not just for the quick buck today and to pop up our economy today, but it's the longer term version of how do we do this right? How do we not offend our Indigenous partners across the country? How do we get them all on the same page? How do we get Canadians to be all supportive of projects? I mean, at the end of the day, I think when Trump is joking about being the governor of Canada and the 51st state, what does he want? He wants our resources, right? He wants a cheap pipeline into our lumber, into our water, into our hydro, into our, oil and gas. And so, yes, that's understandable, but we have to develop it at a speed that we feel is proper and sustainable and smart.
So are you for getting rid of the carbon tax?
Listen, we have to take things step by step. I think the taxing in Canada is, we're almost up to here, right? And I think that Mark Carney is coming out with a very good proposal, and I'm very supportive and working with him today, as I did with Justin in past years, helping him raise money and helping the sort of notion of liberal values, but with more of a business focus.
Okay, I guess that is all the time we have for now. Is there anything else you want our listeners to understand about your excitement about this project?
I've just always been a glass half full person. I think it's important for the Jewish people to have a really strong international good news story. We're not great at promoting ourselves. We're not great at giving good news internationally about what Jews are doing outside of the Jewish world. People look at our community and say, wow, they're really good at taking care of themselves, but that's all they do. They sort of built this shtetl world for Jews, and they don't really reach out. And so here's something that, we'd like to make some news internationally and saying, hey, look what the Jewish people are doing for the world when it comes to environmental issues. Very interesting.
And that's what Jewish Canada sounds like for this episode of the CJN Daily, made possible in part thanks to the generous support of the Ira Gluskin and Maxine Granovsky-Gluskin Charitable Foundation. Although Bronfman's new Jewish Climate Trust is the biggest single Jewish environmental fund right now, and he expects it'll get bigger as he attracts more donors, there are a couple of other Canadian charities, Jewish ones, devoting their attention to the environment. As I mentioned, Jeff Hart and Jonathan Goodman's Climate Solutions Prize in Montreal, they partner with the JNF to fund promising new research in Israel and Quebec. And there's the Ronald Roadberg Foundation in BC, which funds green projects too. If you want to read a written transcript of this interview, you can find it now on the CJN's website, right below the podcast player for this episode. We've started putting the transcripts there every day now. Our show is produced by Zachary Judah Kaufman. Our executive producer is Michael Freeman, and our music is by Dov Beck-Levine. Thanks for listening.
On the 80th anniversary of the liberation of Auschwitz comes an unprecedented exhibition about one of history's darkest moments. Auschwitz, Not Long Ago, Not Far Away, features more than 500 original objects, first-hand accounts, and survivor testimonies that tell the powerful story of the Auschwitz concentration camp, its history and legacy, and the underlying conditions that allowed the Holocaust to happen. On now exclusively at ROM. Tickets at rom.ca.